This is Michael Woodward, and this is Season 3, Episode 218 of the Jumble Think Podcast.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Jumble Think Podcast, where we interview amazing entrepreneurs about their journey of turning dreams and ideas into reality. Along the way, we're going to share some tips on how you can turn your own dreams and ideas into reality too. Our guest on Friend Friday this week is Eric Nevins. More about Eric in a moment. Whether you're new to the Jumble Think Podcast or a longtime listener, I encourage you to head on over to your favorite place to listen to podcasts and subscribe to the Jumble Think Podcast. We've made it even easier. If you like listening on iTunes, head on over to jumblethink.com/iTunes, and for Spotify, jumblethink.com/Spotify. While you're there, leave us a rating and review and let others know what you think of the Jumble Think Podcast too. Now let's jump into today's episode. Hey there, welcome to the Jumble Think Podcast. My name is Michael Woodward. I am your host. We have an incredible guest lined up for you today. Before we get going, we want to thank our sponsors for today's episode, Mighty Travels and OpportunityInChina.com. If you've ever struggled to find the best fares for your next trip, head on over to mightytravels.com/jumblethink to learn more about how they can help you secure the best fares for your trip. And our friends over at OpportunityInChina.com will help you find teaching or learning opportunities in China. We'll be telling you a little bit more about both of our sponsors later in today's episode. Over the last few weeks, we've been trying something new here at the Jumble Think Podcast. We call it Friend Friday. Next week, we're back to our Friday topical episodes. You'll be hearing more Friend Fridays throughout 2019 as we have friends on to share their story. This week's Friend Friday friend is Eric Nevins. He is on a really cool journey. He took the leap out of corporate America into the world of podcasting and also course creation. He has a great podcast called the Halfway There Podcast, where he has honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. In today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about his journey of chasing the dream and creating something new. We're going to talk a little bit about taking risk and what it takes to make those dreams and ideas a reality. Super fun episode. So let's jump into the conversation we had with our friend for Friend Friday, Eric Nevins. Hey, Eric, thanks so much for being on the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Michael. Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here with you.
Now, we did the B-side, which is our Facebook Lives, and they're a lot of fun, but for some reason, we never got you on one of these episodes, the main podcast. So I'm excited to have you on for a Friend Friday to talk to you as a friend.
Yeah, I think we just got busy, but I'm glad to be here. It'll be fun.
I was on your podcast, episode 110. Anyway, all that to say, I'm excited to tell your story on today's episode. To get started, let's talk a little bit about your story into entrepreneurship because it's an abnormal one.
Yeah, that's true.
You, of course, have a background in theology and pastoral ministries. You end up working for a bank, and now you're a podcaster that's offering some really cool programs. Tell us about that journey of how did you go on this journey?
Yeah. Well, so I'll tell you what, I think I actually always wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Okay.
I just really know that it was a thing or how to go about it.
Yeah.
So definitely, even one of the things that appealed to me about pastoral ministry is the sense of kind of leading something that I know that it's not all you, but kind of leading something, having some time freedom, and being able to create at the same time. So those are some of the things that appealed to me. But even before that, I actually had wanted to be like an actor, which
the
actors are actually entrepreneurs as well. I don't know if I was ever really good enough to be an actor. Maybe if I had pursued it a little bit. But that was kind of my ambition. So being an entrepreneur was really always something I wanted to do. Eventually, we ended up moving out to Denver, where I am now, to go to school or finish up seminary. And
let's pause right there. Let's talk a little bit about the journey. You went to Chicago. Where are you from? Tell us a little bit about that journey of place to place.
Sure. So I'm from Des Moines, Iowa originally.
Okay.
So Midwestern, salt of the earth kind of family. Definitely in our family, the message was grow up and get a job, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
So the idea of being an entrepreneur wasn't really something that it was kind of looked at with a sideways glance, even though I found out later, I didn't know this, but my grandfather became an entrepreneur in his 40s.
Oh, wow.
He had I don't know the story of how he got fired somehow. He was working at a bank. He got fired. I don't know what happened, if it was a sales thing or whatever, but he then ended up starting his own business, going around Iowa managing farms. And so it's in there somewhere. It's in my blood. It just wasn't necessarily part of what I was taught.
Crazy. So, all right, you talk a little bit about there that you had a desire to be an actor, decide to go into pastoral ministry because I did the same thing. I went into pastoral ministry. Don't regret that at all, or studied it at least. So tell us about the transition the last couple of years, because you've taken a big risk of saying, you know what, I studied pastoral care. I'm working at a bank. Something's not working here. I've got to make a shift. So tell us that story.
Yeah. So when I graduated seminary, and I'll make this part quick, we'll fly through about 10 years, but I graduated right at the end of or kind of in the middle of the downturn, 2008, 2009.
Now, was this your when you went for your Master's of Divinity, or was this previously?
Yeah, so I Master of Divinity with an emphasis in soul care.
Okay.
Or spiritual formation. And so I graduated. I started looking for jobs. Nothing ever really felt right for me. And I don't know if that was me. I didn't have a ton of experience. I probably could have gone to some little rural church somewhere, which was fine. God bless the people who do that. Just never felt like that was the right thing or what God was asking me to do. And so I never really found a job. In the meantime, I'm working at this financial firm, not really all that happy about it. I'm talking to people on the phone. And then I eventually was able to go into a job where I was kind of a help desk. So I was helping, I was teaching. So that was okay. But it's still very corporate and not really where I wanted to be. And then I discovered the online world, right? So blogging and having your own website. I tried to do a political blog for a while. That's not a good idea, Michael. That was my first attempt at things. I've quickly realized that I wasn't really, I didn't have a lot new to say, much as I thought I did. That was okay. Good to know. But one of the things that happened there, I don't remember if I've told you this story, but one of the things that happened is I discovered when you have a blog, you can get books for free.
Yeah.
So I asked for a book, or actually, I was asking for books, but they sent me, this is InterVarsity Press, they sent me a book by Os Guinness called A Free People's Suicide.
Okay.
And this book is pretty heady. It's about freedom and the whole, just philosophy. He's a philosopher, so the philosophical idea of freedom. Interesting in that regard. But he eventually, kind of towards the back, he talks about how our whole political system in the United States is hinged on the character of the people.
Okay.
And that struck a chord with me because I realized that in certain of the debates that were going on at the time, one side, the conservative side, which is where I tend to fall, was very focused on creating laws and creating things to dictate actions to people. And the other side was very focused on telling stories to create the environment for the laws to come up. And one was more effective than the other. It was the story side.
Okay.
So that actually changed my whole perspective on what I should be doing. Instead of trying to tell people what to think or to do, I wanted to start telling stories. So we could fast forward to about 2014, 2015. I realized when I finally started to figure out, well, how could I do this? I had rediscovered podcasting. And I was looking for a way to kind of get back into sharing spiritual formation ideas. And that's how I decided, instead of doing a podcast where I tell people what to do or what scripture, I've got all kinds of scripture training. I could tell you all about what scripture means or go through that. Instead of doing something like that, because it's a pretty competitive marketplace. A lot of people doing that.
Yeah.
Stories.
Yeah.
Instead, I would get people to share with me their spiritual journeys as a way of normalizing the whole idea of a spiritual journey. That, hey, we sometimes go through the ups and the downs. We have dark nights. We have periods where we don't really trust God, and so we have to navigate through that. And a lot of those stories don't get told on the average Sunday morning. In fact, most people who share their stories with me wouldn't want to get up in front of 200, 300, 400 people or 1,000 people.
Right.
But they'll tell me, and I can put them in front of 1,000 people or more. And I think it's really valuable.
For me, I really resonate with that. That's one of the areas I personally am working at growing better at, is the art of storytelling. And from a biblical standpoint, of course, you've got the tool that Jesus used, which was parable,
Right.
which is conveying messages through stories of morality, stories of challenge, whatever it is. So tell us a little bit about that pivot for you to go, hey, this political thing isn't working. Maybe I should go start another podcast or move from the blog space, start a podcast and talk about Jesus. So talk to us a little bit about that pivot.
Yeah, so I had started and restarted my blog multiple times, just trying to figure out, trying to find my voice.
Yeah.
Where is it that I am, that I can actually talk? What I've discovered is that I don't actually like writing that much. I like talking, and I don't really know. So this is one of the things I had to accept about myself, which is really, every entrepreneur journey is really a journey of accepting yourself, right, and becoming more of yourself.
Right.
I realized that I actually don't know what I think until I say it out loud.
Okay.
And so podcasting or a verbal medium was a lot better for me. So yeah, that realization with the book with Os Guinness was really a huge pivot. And then I eventually started to just ask people to be on the show, to tell me their stories, people who had shared in church, or I started asking around my church, hey, what who do you know that should tell me their story, and people would recommend others, and just kind of snowballed from there.
Super cool. The podcast, of course, is called Halfway There. You have 131 episodes the last time I checked, which was, earlier today. How many? So you have 131 episodes. Are you releasing one episode, 2 episodes a week? What's that look like?
It's one a week. So we launched on June 6, 2016. And so we're up on our 3rd anniversary. Wow.
That's pretty crazy. And tell us a little bit about the guests that you have on, the variety of them, and the kind of stories people are going to hear.
I love to hear all kinds of different stories. So one thing that happens, especially around conversion, because some people have really dramatic conversion stories, right? I talked to one of my favorites is I got to talk to John Schlitt, who was the lead singer of Petra, Christian rock band back in the 80s and 90s. And they were one of my favorites. So I just reached out to him to see if he would talk to me, and he did. He said yes, it was cool. But his conversion story is really dramatic. He says he went to see this pastor that he didn't even remember agreeing to see because he was so drunk. His wife was like, well, you agreed to come when you were drunk last night. He's like, I couldn't argue with her. And he says, I went into that meeting with an attitude. I came out with the Holy Spirit, right? Wow. Just dramatic overnight turn. So he immediately gave up drugs and alcohol, and 5 years later he was singing for Petra, which is just kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are those stories. Sometimes there are stories that are more like mine, where you came to Christ, you grew up in a Christian family, you found Jesus through that, and there are ups and downs, there are back and forth, but really you don't really know. Some of my guests don't really know a life without God.
Wow.
I love that, actually. So sometimes people who don't have a dramatic story feel like, it's nothing too special. But I think there's value in all of them, because God works in every single life. And it's really important to, I think, affirm that not only that he does that, but affirm that this is their experience of who God is. And it's good for them. It's good for them to share it with us.
Super cool. All right. One of the things that fascinates me about your journey is that you left the world of business, working at a bank, and took the risk to step into the dreams that you have. We're all about dreams and ideas. So tell us that journey of going, you know what, I've got to take the risk. Because often people stop at the dream and they never take the risk to step into the future that they want to create. So for you, what was that process like to say, I know what I'm doing isn't what I'm called to do or I'm created to do, and now I've got to make the pivot? What were the emotions? What was the process to get from there to what you're doing today?
Oh man, it was a long process.
Okay.
It took forever. It took literally years. So I think I graduated in 2009, and it wasn't until just last year, 2018, so 9 years, where I was constantly fascinated by this world of online business.
Yeah.
And trying to, and just not able to kind of focus on it the way I wanted to. So, the podcast became really finally something that I did that was actually successful. So we grew it was steady. Quick is probably not the right word, but steadily from the beginning. I think the first year we had 10,000 downloads, and then last year we had like 120,000 downloads or so.
Wow.
So it's growing. It's not certainly the biggest in the world, but it is for the Christian category that's not sermons. We do pretty well. But anyway, so seeing that be successful just fueled my desire to want to create things for people who are on the journey. One of my convictions is that the journey has different sections to it. There's different legs of the journey, if you will. And we don't always do, even Evangelical Church doesn't always do a great job speaking to everybody in that place. Yeah. So I had this kind of thing burning inside me. So trying to figure out how to do that, it was a long process. What we ended up doing is taking a bit of a risk. We refinanced our house, and so we had some cash. We did a little bit of a remodel, and the rest was we used so that I could just quit my job and work on this full time.
Wow.
Which is risky, right?
Yeah.
I mean, say it out loud, I'm like, oh, don't judge me. It's I know, I get it. But what I knew is that I had to do it because I was on this path where, working at the financial company, I was going to get a 2% raise basically forever.
Wow.
And even on a good year, it was like 2.25%. And they'd be like, oh, you should be happy. I'm like, really? For my extra $300 a year? Okay. Fine. And I just couldn't stand the fact that I was so capped unless I wanted to get like a broker's license and move into management, which is not what I wanted to do at all.
Yeah.
In fact, I tried the summer that I started thinking about a podcast. I studied for the Series 7 exam.
Yeah.
And I started doing the practice exams, and I went, I can't do this. Wow. I can't. This is just not who I am.
Wow.
And I was like I was like shaking. I was so angry because the questions. They legitimately try to trick you. And I thought, if this is the kind of industry, this is the kind of thing they have to do to keep people honest, I don't think I want to be in this industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was when I knew I had to do something dramatic to kind of get out. And I've pictured that as a mountain. So, I knew that the road I was on goes at a 2% rise every year from here to whenever I leave. And over on the right of me is a mountain that I want to be on of, online business.
Yeah.
I've got to go that direction. And so, the thing about mountains though, is that it's up and down. Like it's not always a straight shot up. Yeah. Usually there's switchbacks and there's valleys and hills.
Yeah, so you've made this pivot, and now in the last year or so, you've figured out some ways to start saying, we know the products and services we want to offer to make this a monetizable business. It's cool to have the podcast, and hopefully through sponsorship and other things, you're going to gain some traction there to make it financially viable. But then you're also creating your own curriculum. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I have had this idea for a really long time, almost all the way back to when I first started blogging. I had heard a podcast episode about a guy who was creating these really small, inexpensive PDFs that he would sell on his website that help people.
Yeah. So
I had this idea I wanted to do something like that. I just never really could nail it down or like figure out how exactly was I going to do that. So last fall, after we met at New Media Summit, I was like, I'm committing to this. I'm going to actually make these things. And I had been calling them in my mind an 8-day Bible study. But I realized I didn't really want them to be a Bible study per se, like a traditional Bible study. But I knew I wanted them to be short because I've never finished a 40-day Bible study in my life. I don't know about you, but those big long ones that you have a group once a week, and I kind of scramble to finish everything an hour beforehand. That's not good for me. It's full of a ton of shame. Right?
No, I feel you on that. I often would show up and be like, I'm just going to be honest. I didn't read it.
Right. I didn't do it. But
let's talk about it.
Right. Right. So there's that, writing versus talking again. But so anyway, I decided I wanted to create something that would take that kind of piece out of it so that it wasn't too long.
Yeah.
That you could do it you didn't have to do it in, every single day. So I think sometimes we hear this, read your Bible and pray every day, which is great. It's good advice. You should do that. It's good for you. We don't always tell each other how to do that very well. So I wanted to create something that would help people who've done all the Bible studies. They have the knowledge. They've been around the church for a long time, but they need something to kind of connect them to God in a new way. So I created this thing called 8-Day Experience. And the first one is on a little passage in Mark 1, 40 through 45, little exchange that Jesus has with a man who has leprosy. And I just take you through it. In fact, it's not going to take you long. It takes, maybe 15 minutes every day. But the questions that go with it are so powerful. You're just going to keep coming over and over again for 8 days, whether you do it 8 consecutive days or 1 a week for 2 months, which I would totally be in favor of, because you're going to just get this passage into your heart if you do that.
Yeah, for sure.
Those questions are going to stick with you, and you're going to be thinking about it, in the shower while you're driving, or when you're doing other things. And that's what I'm after. I really don't care if you spend, an hour in prayer with this thing. I care if you're thinking about it and asking God about it throughout your day.
Yeah. Yeah. So powerful, because it's almost like you're marinating in it versus like out of sight, out of mind. I did my daily duty. Now I've got to move on for the rest of my day. But this allows you to percolate and just let it simmer in your consciousness and your spirit throughout the day, and process deeper into your heart and into your being. Right.
Yeah, that's the idea. So it's actually a process. Have you ever heard of Lectio Divina?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's Lectio, really. So all I've done is I've taken Lectio, which you could do on a regular basis, or people do. You can sit and do it in 40 minutes. I've taken it and kind of stretched it out over 8 days.
Yeah.
So give you a chance to go through.
For those people who don't know what that is, explain what that is.
Yeah. So Lectio is just really, Lectio Divina means spiritual reading. It's just Latin for spiritual reading. So it's a process that has been developed. The church has used it for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands. And it's just a way of kind of approaching a passage to do a devotional reading without if you had a devotional or something. Yeah. So really it's 4 parts. It's reading the passage, it's reflecting on the passage, it's responding on the passage, and then remaining with the passage. And then some people add return as well. So that's what I've done, is the first 4 days are reading, responding, reflecting, and remaining. And then the last 4 days are return, 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 return.
Yeah, super cool. I want to, as we go towards the end of this first segment, we always ask these final 3 questions. The first one being, how are you finding purpose in what you're doing?
Well, I think as long as I can help people with their journey with God, if I can normalize the experiences that they're having so they don't feel ashamed of those things, that gives me a lot of purpose. If I can let people know that God cares about them regardless of what they have done or where they are in the journey, and that's okay to be there, that drives me a lot.
And for you, what's the one challenge you're currently working to overcome in the business portion of what you're building?
Yeah, it's so hard to know how to market something like an experience with God.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
it's pretty personal, isn't it?
How do you promise that? So I've really wrestled with that a lot.
Yeah. And then what's the next big goal you have for the business?
So my big goal for this year is to write 24 8-day experiences. So I've got two
cool.
under my belt, and they're not really that hard to write, but they do take a little bit of time to kind of get all polished up and ready to publish. So it's a big goal, but I'm working on it.
Super cool. We'll be back with Eric Nevins to go deeper into the art of storytelling, finding your voice, and a pretty important question. You'll have to check back to hear what that question is in a moment. We want to take a moment and thank our sponsors for today's episode, OpportunityInChina.com and Mighty Travels. Here's a little bit more from our friends over at OpportunityInChina.com. Have you been looking for a way to change your career or social prospects? Do you see the world around you changing and haven't quite figured out what path you should take? You are not alone in seeking opportunity. Visit OpportunityInChina.com for access to scholarships to attend university in China, or if you have a bachelor's degree already, OpportunityInChina.com provides access to jobs in the educational sector all across China. Now, working in China is not only often well paid, but it will place you among 1/5 of the world's population, boosting your social network, bringing you more deeply into the story of globalization, opening up doors you never knew existed. So seize your opportunity now. Visit their website for more information at OpportunityInChina.com. By the way, they have a great podcast. Simply search for Opportunity in China Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. We also want to thank our friends over at Mighty Travels for sponsoring today's episode. Here's a little bit more about them. One of my favorite things to do is to travel. But often I am spending hours, maybe even days, looking through travel searches for the right airfare. Our friends over at Mighty Travels make it so much easier. You can go in, set your desired location when you want to go, and get notifications sent to you via email and text message so that you can grab those special deals when they're there. If you want to save money, up to even like $190 per ticket, Mighty Travels is the place to check out. So swing on over to mightytravels.com/jumblethink to learn more about how you can access some great notifications to get the best fares for your trip. Again, that's mightytravels.com/jumblethink. Go on over, check them out, and start saving on your trips. Now let's continue the conversation we had with our friend Eric Nevins. We are back with Eric Nevins. Okay, Eric, you've got the podcast halfway there. You've got the 8-day experience. People might be listening and going, this resonates with me. How can they find what you're doing?
Yeah, the best way is to go to halfwaytherepodcast.com/8-day experience.
Mm-hmm.
You can just find it right there. Take you right to the first one that I wrote about that encounter between Jesus and the leper.
Yeah.
It's easy to find.
Super cool. We'll put those notes in the episode notes, which are probably down below wherever you're listening, whether it's on the website, whether it's on iTunes or Spotify. Usually the notes are somewhere down below, so search down there, find that link, click it there, and you can find Eric. Okay, Eric, we didn't tell the story. We should tell the story of how we met and how we became friends. We met back in September at New Media Summit, which is an event all around podcasting and using podcasting as a mechanism to share your message. Since then, we've been to a second New Media Summit together. We've stayed in touch through, I've been on your podcast, you've been on the B-side. We chat back and forth about some of the things I'm working on with Idea Camp, some of the things you're doing. One of the things that I think so much of our culture is missing is a sense of community. And I think Steve, the guy that puts on the event, does a good job of cultivating culture. How does culture impact our journey of faith? Or not culture, but community, for that matter. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting right now because I think culture is affecting our idea of community.
Okay.
In a lot of ways. It's never been more possible to be more isolated, right?
Yeah.
'Cause you can feel connected using the internet just being at home. Or you can sit and binge watch Netflix all day, which I have to admit I did one day right after the last summit.
Yeah.
So I think culture is definitely affecting us in that way. It's also affecting what people want. I think it's really interesting that millennials want like true and deep connection, and they want authenticity because living in a world where everything is marketing, let's put it that way. They really want people who are willing to be real with them, and I'm not sure the church has really caught up to that yet.
Yeah, I agree with that. We always say on this podcast that so much of what's going on is breeding false intimacy without responsibility, and I think that is something that we're really struggling with as a church in America. And typically we're not this forward with our faith in the podcast, but I think it's really important for this episode. It's an important part of my journey. And the church has done really a good job, church being the larger picture, not individual churches, of cultivating programs and systems and forgetting the people that they serve. I want to ask you, there has been so much said about the church in the last 10 years in a negative way. People's experiences, people's hurts and wounds, people feeling like they've lost God, they've lost a sense of each other. If you were to paint a picture of the church you see based on your studies, based on your experience through the podcast and interviewing other people, and you would say, this is the church God desires us to have here on earth, what would that community look like?
Yeah, so I love to go back to Acts chapter 2.
Okay.
And, kind of around verse 42 or so, it talks about what the disciples would do, right? And what the early church would do. And funny enough, there are almost no programs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's all community. They would get together. The apostles would teach. And so they were explaining how Jesus fulfills all of the things that they already knew from the Old Testament. And they would kind of pick that up. And then I'm sure there were moral teachings as well, because they lived in a really interesting moral climate there.
Yeah.
But they will also eat together, right? Mm-hmm. They would give to each other. They would take, if somebody had extra land or extra assets and others needed it, they would just give it, and they didn't have to publicly shame them, right? In order to make that happen, they would just do it to the point that some people would do it just for the public recognition. That's an interesting story. We don't have to go there. But then they would also, they would pray. They would, show up together and break bread. And it says that they had everything in common. So, I think as much as we can get back to that, the better. So it's interesting. I think perhaps the church is happening outside of the confines of church buildings, and certainly more in community. This is one reason my wife and I love in the summertime to host barbecues at our house. Yeah. So I will. I just recently cooked pulled pork for 200 people. Yeah. At our church, but I love to do that and just make a bunch of food, have a bunch of people over. We'll have a few cold ones and talk about what life is like.
Now, for you, if you were talking to a global summit of church leaders, and you were to say, this is the one mantle that we need to get back to, as a person who studies this, as a person who talks to people, who you talk a lot about the conversion journey for them, what would you say to those leaders? If you were to give them a challenge and say, as leaders, we need to step up and really do what?
I would say we need to understand the spiritual journey.
Okay.
So I would tell most programs are geared for people who are in a learning stage of the journey. Okay. And so here's how I've been saying it. I think there's 4 journeys that every Christian goes on. The first one is the journey of meeting Jesus, usually for the first time. The second one is the journey of learning Jesus, and I think this is where programs are really good, because we can put people in the seats, and we can get people to volunteer, and we can learn how to serve. And we can also, just learn all this stuff about the Bible and theology and things that are really easy to mass produce. That eventually becomes kind of problematic, or it doesn't satisfy the way it did. I had a friend come up to me and say, when he was an early Christian, he's a teacher, and his school is going through the Bible in a year. Okay. And he said, "Listen, I'm not this isn't. I just don't love it. And I feel kind of bad about that, because when I was a new Christian, I loved it. I would sit and read scripture all day, right?" And he says, this isn't I'm just not engaged in. I don't understand. And I said, well, it's because you've moved on. You were in that journey, right? And now you've grown past that, and so now you're into serving in new ways.
Yeah.
So that's where I would tell most church leaders, like, get beyond the learning part. These are the ones that scale, but when you get beyond the learning part, go to the journey of learning finding yourself in Jesus.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that has to be a lot more individual, a lot less, large group. It involves both kind of finding yourself and then finding how you serve. And then there's the journey of loving like Jesus, which I hope to get to someday.
One of the other things I really wanted to talk to you about is the lack of integrity in our churches today.
Yeah.
You look at one of the big churches in Chicago area, a guy named McDonald pastors that. Bill Hybels, also in Chicago area, and other pastors around the globe. You hear about it, whether it's the prosperity guy who says, I need my third jet, or whether it's the person cheating on his wife or treating his leadership badly. There doesn't seem to be accountability in the church to say, God has called us to a higher standard. Where did we lose that?
I don't know. I've thought about that a lot in terms of these leaders of very large churches, which is fine. I mean, the New Testament is full of large churches, and if they're gifted to do it, go for it. But I wonder about some of the practices. It takes a tremendous amount of humility. I also think, not all of these people may have been ready for that kind of responsibility. Yeah. You know what I mean? There's a certain amount of humility that needs to go with leadership, and they were talented, and so they were able to kind of build a ministry where they had people who would say, oh yeah, this is cool, and we're gonna come. So where do we lose it? I don't know, because it's really been going on for a long time, hasn't it? I mean, yeah. We can go back 30, 40 years and see that at least. And so I'm sure that there were others in the past as well. Part of the problem is we're human, right? Yeah. And so it's hard. We have a lot of expectations of pastors, that they be perfect, that they have, they have a certain standard of living, and they should. On the other hand, they also need to have permission to be human. I mean, if Tony Soprano can go to counseling, why can't your pastor?
Right. A
lot of pastors don't feel like they can.
Yeah.
That's hard.
For sure. And this is something I've thought about a lot too. I know you recently wrote a pretty long Facebook post about this from the larger scale, higher view level of this. And for me, I remember back when I was in ministry school and studying all of this fun stuff. And our teacher would say, your giftings take you to the top, but it's your character that keeps you there. But it seems like somewhere along the line, we forgot character. That's like, hey, if somebody's got giftings, we can forego if they're abusive in leadership. If their giftings will get them up there and they can grow a big celebrity culture around them and be a light for Jesus, then the character doesn't need to be there. And I'm thinking of even like some people I know personally who are on big platforms, whether it's TBN or other stations, and yet on the personal life, they're dealing with stuff that maybe they should step back, and maybe their leadership, the people around them, need to be saying, hey, you got some areas you need to get healthy about, because if you keep going down this way, it's going to lead destruction for you and the church, and then the larger church around it, the global church, and the reputation of Jesus. And that I find really sad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah. So I really think that part of the issue is we've misdiagnosed what spiritual maturity is.
Okay.
So we actually often think of spiritual maturity as being a person who can get up and speak powerfully about a passage of Scripture. Mm-hmm. And that's what, James McDonald, God bless him. I pray for that guy. I really hope that this experience refines him. But he's really good. He's a preacher, right?
Yeah,
he's able to get up and speak powerfully. That's good. He's a teacher. He's got some gifting. But I think if that's all we think people in ministry should be, then it's a problem. That's what I was saying about those 4 journeys, right? It's that learning stage. We've prioritized that learning stage, and we've said, okay, however, if you however much you know and however much you do, that's going to prove to us whether or not you're spiritually mature. Yeah. I think it's implicit. Nobody actually says that, right? But it's just sort of how we operate. Whereas I think the definition of spiritual maturity is how you love like Jesus.
Yeah.
So you can see. So I'll give you an example just in Scripture. So like John is one of those people who, Jesus called him the son of thunder, right, with his brother. Yeah. Because they were ready to call down fire on people who were mocking them or whatever. Like they were on fire. Well, eventually, he grew in his relationship with the Lord to the point that when he writes his letters from Patmos, his message to people is, little children, love one another. Yeah. Like he's grown in the love of Christ to see other people through Christ. So, I don't know. I can't presume to judge where James McDonald is or Bill Hybels is on the spiritual journey. I don't know them. Yeah. But I can tell you, my guess is if we held them to a standard of growth and helping them step into loving like Jesus, this probably wouldn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a good friend of ours. He's been on the podcast. His name's Gaylord Enns. He's written a book called The Command of Christ, and he talks about John and his later years when he was very, very old. They'd carry him into a room, and they'd be like, hey, tell us the one thing that you think Jesus wants us to learn. And he would say, love one another, and he would just repeat it over and over and over again. Somewhere along the way, as followers of Christ, we've lost the big picture here. We've lost our sense of love for being right and justified. So how do we get back to that place of what you're talking about and really understanding how to love like Christ loves the church, how Christ loves us, how he demonstrated love to others, and how he shattered the preconceived ideas of what a God King ruler would look like here on earth? Yeah.
I think the first thing that the institutional church in America has to do specifically is to let politics go. Okay. We have gotten so embroiled in politics. So I don't know how controversial you want to get, Michael, but I'll use
go for it. Go for it.
I think so. For instance, just the gay marriage debate, right, is a great example where I think the church became known for being against people. That's sad. That's not okay with me. We became known for just being and really seen as being hateful and spiteful because we were pushing a political agenda. Yeah. I'm not okay with that, because here's the reality. If even, God loves them. God loves people who are homosexual. God loves people who are in those kind of relationships. I may disagree with it as a choice, as a practice, but I know that God loves those people, and I have to love those people. Yeah. So I think that's the first thing, is eliminate that. And the other thing I think is, let's take some effort to go out and know people. It's really hard to hate people Yeah. It's really hard to judge people that what they're struggling with. Yeah. So we need to just know more people, get out into our neighborhoods, serve them in whatever ways we can, and that'll do wonders.
Super good advice. I love that for sure. I wanted to make sure in today's episode, you talked a little bit about the power of storytelling and why you're incorporating that more into how you share the message of Jesus, how you share the message or the stories of others. How can we cultivate storytelling into our life patterns of how we communicate to each other?
Yeah, I think one thing it'd be valuable to know is your story. Okay. So just understand your story. Take a look. If you've never taken a little spiritual retreat and gone back through your life and gone through the kind of how God has been there in various moments, that's a really good thing to do. So the second 8-day experience I wrote was on John chapter 2, where Jesus turns water into wine, because something really interesting happens there. Mary comes up to him and says, "Hey, they're out of wine." And Jesus is like, well, what's that got to do with me? Yeah. And she looks at the servants from there. She doesn't even respond to Jesus. She just looks at the servants and goes, do whatever he says. I kept wondering, why does she do that? Well, she does that because she has experience with Jesus. She knows what Jesus is about to do. My guess is because Jesus has done that for her before. She was probably a widow by this time, so
yeah.
she had needs, and Jesus would meet them sometimes. I think our entire faith is based on experience. So if you can take your experience and just write it out and have an idea of what God has done for you in that, you can share it with other people, but it'll also boost your own faith as well.
Yeah. Which is the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, basically by the power of God through his sacrifice and by our stories, our experiences, people will know these things.
Yeah.
Super cool. All right. I want to go back to the beginning where we started. One of the things you said is that it's been a journey of finding your own voice.
Yeah.
I think that there is a great divide between persona and authenticity of identity. And identity is so critical to the journey of turning dreams and ideas into reality, finding your created purpose and stepping into the things you were born to do. Finding your voice, finding the things that are authentic to you, the places that you need to invest is a place that all of us need to operate from. It's a place that all of us could do better, especially because we curate our character. We characterize ourselves in the persona we put out to the world through our social channels, through how we allow people to see us. So in the journey for you, you've found your voice. You're continuing to craft and find your true self and identity in that. What can others do to find the same thing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the one thing you need to do if you want to find your voice is start speaking.
Okay.
So
like where and how? What does that mean?
Yeah. So whether that means it might be for you, it depends on whatever your medium is, and that's okay. So if you're a writer, then you need to write and you need to publish and you need to have a blog and just share things. If you're like to speak, get a podcast. It's really easy to do. I can show you. I'm sure you can show people how to do that. It takes work, right? But it can be done. And so whatever your medium is, find your medium. Even if it's just going on Facebook Live. I've told people before, if you want to have an audience and you want to find your voice, Facebook Live is entirely free, right? Yeah. Facebook is thrilled to share your live with other people because it is content on their platform. So, show up and just set a time and do it on a regular basis. So whether you do a couple of Facebook Lives a week to talk about just what's on your mind a little bit, that's a good place to start.
I want to go a little bit deeper because so much of finding your voice is about removing the voice of others in that journey. Often we curate what we want others to do because or how others view us because we want acceptance, we want to be embraced. But part of finding your voice is knowing without a doubt who you are and what you stand for and being clear on that. So how can you remove some of the distractions and obstacles, the voices that are influencing the things that you're crafting in your own voice, finding your voice? How can you begin to cut through the clutter, the noise that's influencing us so much and find that authentic place to speak from?
Yeah, I love that question because I had to do that. I was so scared about what people would say about the theology I was sharing on my show. I had lots and lots of theological education. Some people, there's a right and there's a wrong, right? That's what I came up to it with. And so I had to kind of get over that to the point that even just recently I shared on a podcast that I didn't agree with a certain theological position that was pretty standard. So you have to kind of, I think it's a matter of trial and error. I think it's a matter of trying. So you're like, how do you get rid of or how do you take away those voices? I think you just have to practice and get used to putting it out there and then dealing with the aftermath. If somebody doesn't like what you say, you have to weigh that against your own what's the word I'm looking for, Michael? Like your own kind of barometer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I have kind of a place where I know that in my heart where things came from. So if I was trying to impress, that's one thing. But if I'm trying to just share authentically who I am, what I believe, that's a whole different thing. And so I'm much more comfortable now sharing that. I don't know if that answers your question, though.
Yeah, let's go one step further into this.
Sure.
Getting started is a hard journey because you have to wrestle with your own insecurities. You have to wrestle with your own mess. You have to wrestle with the things inside of you and finding your voice. And I know for some people, they may be going, if I start writing about it, that's a very public forum. If I start Facebook Living, that's a very public forum. What's a small step they can take in the journey of finding their own voice, finding the messages that matter to them, that they could do that and not feel like it's such a risk to make that first step?
Yeah. Well, I suppose, at its most basic level, you could just get a journal, right? And say, hey, this is what, just start writing and get used to putting that out there. I think going public, though, is a pretty important step. Why is that? Well, because I think until you're willing to share who you are with the world, you're still always going to wrestle with that. You're going to wrestle with your own insecurity. At least I did. So I really needed to put it out there and have the fear that nobody was going to listen to it, have the fear that it would be judged, and then find that to actually not mostly be true.
Okay.
So for me, that was good. I'm curious about you. Like, what was there some step as you started stepping out that kind of helped you?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, at least for the podcast for me, was all about success and measuring success. And that was part of the journey of finding my voice because for me, often it was about like, oh, is this going to get me more listeners? What are people going to think if they didn't know that I don't have 1 billion listeners, 30 seconds into my first podcast? All of those kind of things that mark, especially the business side of things, of what is success. And it was that moment where I said, somebody, I forget who it was a recent podcast, probably in the maybe last year. So it may actually be longer than I'm thinking. They said, when did you know you were successful? And I said, when I decided that I get to define success. Yeah. And instead of taking the perception of what others define as success or how they say, this is how you are successful. And I started to say, no, success for me is doing X, Y, Z, not doing what I perceive as what success is defined by the world, by others, by thought leaders, whoever it was I was looking up to at the time.
Yeah.
And start saying, go ahead.
I pretty quickly redefine success for the podcast. Because, when you start out, you think, oh, I'm going to hit new and noteworthy and it's going to be amazing. And
then you find out new and noteworthy is broken.
Yeah, you're right. And I was like, oh, that doesn't happen. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I was a little depressed about that, but I pretty quickly decided that my standard of success was going to be whether or not we're growing. Can I get it out there? Yeah. And is it month over month? Are we able to keep going forward that people will listen? So that was really, so I relate to what you're saying, that, being able to define that myself instead of saying, oh, success is being, having 1 million listeners. No, this month, my third month, success was having 500 listens. That was great.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think the second part for me was so often we make decisions because it's either easy or we think it's going to be accepted. And so for me, there were a lot of guests that I brought onto the podcast that now I would look back and say they were bad guests because they didn't reinforce the vision that we had for where we wanted to take it. Mm-hmm. And in that, we lost our voice because we're allowing others to take from that voice. And I think that that's the thing, is that in what you're creating, you bring on a lot of guests, and a lot of those guests have opposing views, even around faith for you, from you. But for you, you still have that constant of that linear, this is what I believe, this is the line that I put in the sand for us, this is my message. So how are you, especially with the interview, with podcast episodes, able to delineate between diluting your message and allowing others to have their voice?
Yeah, well, I think part of my message is that other people need to have their voice. So I guess I just defined it in.
Yeah.
I think, I guess that's what I did. But I I just love the idea of experience. So I think, which I did not know. I don't remember if we talked about this, but I did not know that this was one of John Wesley's places to go for authority in the Christian life, because I grew up in a more in a different kind of tradition where experience and emotion were pretty much just shunted aside.
Yeah.
Not able to be trusted. And it turns out there's a whole theological tradition where experience does matter, and I've kind of stumbled into it.
Yeah. That's the tradition. I come from the Wesleyan Arminianism side, so yeah. I get what you're saying from the viewpoint of probably of a Calvinistic or that viewpoint of absolutism versus a little bit more free will and experience of God and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so that was kind of amazing for me. But so as going to message though, I think that's what that does for me is my message really is your experience matters and needs to be told. And so when people share their experiences, it automatically is reinforcing my message.
As we wrap up this segment, I want to ask one question. You mentioned experience a couple times, just mentioned it 10 seconds ago. What is the experience that you think people need to have more of to find authenticity?
Vulnerability.
Okay.
We have to be able to share what is actually happening with us in our lives. And not all those things are good, right? So maybe a month ago now, I shared on Facebook I was having a tough day. I'm having a tough day. I'm wondering if I'm ever going to be able to do this whole thing, online business, and a bunch of people were encouraging about that, but I didn't share it to be to get encouragement. I shared it to be authentic on a platform where it's easy for me to not say anything that I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
So I think that's just being vulnerable enough to say, no, I am struggling is really powerful.
Remind people one more time where they can find and connect with you.
Yeah. Best way to find me is at ericnevins.com. And if you were interested in that experience, 8-day experience, there's a link up at the top. You can check that out as well. And of course, there's links on the site to my social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Super cool. We will be back for rapid fire questions and our good friend Eric Nevins. The heartbeat of Jumblethink is to help you turn your dreams and ideas into reality. One of the ways we do that is through this podcast, but we also do it through our free guides. You can head on over to jumblethink.com/guides to learn more about how you can download your free guide. Guides like The Dreamer's Guide to Micro Experiments or How to Know When You've Found Your Dream. They're completely free, so head on over to jumblethink.com/guides. That's jumblethink.com/guides to learn more and download your free guides. We also want to thank our friends over at OpportunityInChina.com for sponsoring today's episode. Here's a little bit more from them.
At the dawn of the 19th century, forward-thinking people moved to the commercial centers of Europe. Moving into the 20th century, America welcomed millions into the land of freedom and opportunity. It is now the 21st century. Many of the successes and fortunes of our generations will be made in China. To learn how you can seize opportunity in China, follow the Opportunity in China podcast. The Opportunity in China podcast is available anywhere podcasts are streamed, or you can visit our website at opportunityinchina.com.
We also want to thank our friends over at Mighty Travels. Here's a little bit more about them. I don't know about you, but I love to travel. I just don't like looking through all the websites to find the right fares to the right locations that I want to travel to. Well, our friends over at mightytravels.com are helping you get better rates to the places you want to travel, often saving up to $190 per ticket. You should check out mightytravels.com/jumblethink to learn more about how you can use their service to get the right trips booked for you at incredible rates. So swing on over, check it out, mightytravels.com/jumblethink. Now let's jump into rapid fire questions with Eric Nevins. We are back with Eric Nevins to talk about, now rapid fire questions. So, Eric, are you ready for rapid fire questions?
Let's do it.
All right. These are fun. The first question is, as a child, what did you want to do or what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, man. Yeah. So the first thing I remember wanting to be was an astronaut.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super cool. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe, I mean, with the way space travel is going, you may still get that.
No doubt. I would actually love to do that. Although my mom reminded me I was a little bit claustrophobic. And then I thought, no, I should find something else to do.
Well, space is a vast place if you can find some oxygen.
Right.
So what is one tip you'd give someone with a big idea or dream and they don't know where to start?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say, man, I hate to say it this way, but I would say start something.
Yeah.
You know, like just even if you don't know where to start, start writing, start journaling, capturing your ideas. Something will hit eventually and you'll be inspired to go do it.
What is one big lie about entrepreneurship you want to break?
It's easy. It's not easy. It's hard. The gurus make it sound easy. And since I've stepped into this, I go, oh, this is a lot harder than I thought. I'm cobbling together income here and there, and I didn't expect, but it is good. I'm learning the craft.
And the gurus give their highlight reels, which make it a lot more appealing.
Right? Yeah, totally.
What's one big change you'd like to see in the world?
I would like to see churches engage their communities in ways that we actually used to do.
Okay.
So, for instance, like medical care. You know, like a lot of churches, the reason they're named, or a lot of hospitals, the reason they're named for like churches or things like that, are because they were started by churches.
Yeah.
Right. And I feel like we should go back to things like that. I think it's much more valuable. It's way better use of our money than politics and things like that.
Well, you know, politics started getting its hold when the church stopped doing what it was called to do.
Right, exactly.
What do you want your legacy to be?
I would love, so first of all, I want my legacy to be for kids who knew that they could do whatever they wanted to do in the world, that were willing to study both an art and a business, the business of that art. But I also would love to see a change, particularly in the American evangelical church, to where we accept the idea of the spiritual journey and offer things for people at every single level of that journey.
What inspires you?
I think great stories inspire me. People who overcome a lot inspires me.
What is one book you think every dreamer or entrepreneur should read and why?
There are so many books. I'm going to go with, I think I said this to you when we did the B-side, but I'm going to go back to this. It's Robinson Crusoe.
Yes, you did say that.
Yeah, and the reason is I don't think fiction is used enough or understood enough. And he has a really interesting story. If you look at it from an entrepreneur story, it's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's funny is when you said that on the B-side, I've thought about that often since then. And I was like, that is actually a really brilliant answer. So now that I've had time to think about it, everyone listening right now, go read some fiction that inspires you to think differently, that inspires you to imagine. We've lost our imagination. Get your imagination back. Yes, you're a grown-up. Still imagine. It's worth it.
It's so worth it. It's so worth just digging into a story.
We talked a lot about success today. How do you define success?
Man, I define success as growth.
Okay.
So as long as I'm able to keep growing and I don't get stuck, I don't get bogged down, and I can have some flexibility to go where I think God is calling me to do, that's what I want.
What is one trend you are currently excited about?
Trend, like a society trend or a...
Define it however you want.
All right. Not flossing. That's not...
That's a good trend to break. Yeah. What is one habit you find helpful in your life as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. Probably my biggest thing is I have a journal. I keep so I have it's just really a notebook that I write everything in, and no matter what project I'm on, it's in there somewhere, and I can flip through and add notes and keep track of things. That is a practice I must have.
What is one thing you wish you would have known when you first started out?
Oh, it's going to be harder than you thought. It's going to be harder. Here's one thing recently I'm thinking about is don't be afraid to dive into things even though you don't understand them yet.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd have known that a little bit sooner.
If you weren't doing what you're doing today, what do you think you'd be doing?
I think I'd be in some sort of entertainment.
Our final rapid fire question is, what is one dream you're still wanting to fulfill in your own life?
I want to start a barbecue restaurant.
That's awesome.
So one of these days I'm going to do that. And I have kind of a larger vision for that, why I want to do that. But also I just love the way food brings people together.
As we wrap up, we always like to leave our guests have a final thought. What's your final thought for us, all of us listening today?
Yeah, so friends, wherever you are, I encourage you to embrace where you are, accept it, dig in. Don't be afraid to grow, but be realistic about where you are and what you need, and that is what will actually take you to the next stage.
Eric, it's been a lot of fun getting to know you over the last several months. I look forward to continuing our friendship. Thanks so much for being on Friend Friday to share your story and give us some insights about faith and business and how they intertwine.
Yeah, thanks, brother, for having me.
Once again, we want to thank Eric for taking time out and being with us today. We also want to thank our sponsors for sponsoring today's episode, OpportunityInChina.com and MightyTravels.com/JumbleThink. On Tuesday's episode, our guest is Adam Miller. He's a killer guitar player, plays a lot of great jazz and blues stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun having him on to talk about the music industry and how he's making it work for him. My final thought for you today is that entrepreneurship is a journey of faith. And I want to encourage you to take that leap of faith to step into the journey of entrepreneurship. Chasing those big ideas and dreams is often a scary thing to do, but it's worth it. So get out there, take a small step today to make those dreams and ideas a reality and ultimately change the world around you.
Les mères de famille, les enfants, peuvent également prendre un moment revitalisant dans quelques mois, lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps. Vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.